my name is Jimmy Joe Simpson Jr. Jimmy, not James, Joe, not Joseph, Simpson Jr. For a Hapa boy born in Hilo, Hawaii, that is like the whitest name you'll probably ever hear in your entire life. But as you can tell from the junior, I got that name from my father, who was also born Jimmy Joe Simpson. And while I may not really emotionally or physically match what you think of when you hear the name Jimmy Joe Simpson, my father does. You see, he is a large white male born in rural Nebraska. He is a farmer. He's a trucker. He rides a Harley. He can often be seen walking around in the summer with like a piece of hay in his mouth and a Budweiser baseball cap. Not even joking. But he is the epitome of Jimmy Joe Simpson. Growing up in Hilo, Hawaii, my father was my best friend and favorite person. When he would pick me up from elementary school, before the truck would even stop in our driveway, I would be begging him to stay outside and play baseball with me, and he always obliged. We eventually moved our family to rural Nebraska, and this trend continued, except my little brother eventually joined in. We'd be outside and we'd be playing basketball, football, baseball. We would be shooting guns. We'd be riding snowmobiles and four-wheelers. I know it's weird when you look at me now that I was doing all that. But he was my favorite person through all of that time. And then in middle school and high school, my dad was always encouraging me to join a sport. And we'd be outside and I'd be like pitching to him and he'd say, "You have a great arm, you should do something with this." And I never wanted to. I wanted to be in theater. I wanted to play saxophone in the band and sing in the choir, be a lawyer in mock trial. I was perfectly content with letting my entire high school sports career consist of my 40-something-year-old father and my 12-year-old brother. And eventually, my dad accepted that. He came to every play, he came to every concert, every speech meet, and he was still my favorite person. When I went to college not too far from our rural Nebraska home, and I eventually came out to my family as gay, and they were shocked. Their very own son, who matched basically every single stereotype that you can think of when you think of like a high school gay boy. There's Jimmy Joe Simpson Jr. was gay, and it was very confusing for them. And so we sat and we talked for a really, really long time. And the last thing that my father said to me on that night that I came out was, "I love you no matter what." And he was still my favorite person. Unfortunately, that was one of the last nights that I viewed my father as one of my favorite people. Over the course of the next 7 years, my father and I began to grow apart, and I began to feel more and more uncomfortable around him. We would take family trips to Hawaii, and while we were there, I would always be asked the inevitable question, "Jimmy, are you dating anyone?" And before I could answer, my father would jump in and he would say, "Oh, well, he doesn't have a girlfriend yet." And then he would look at me as if daring me to say something. And so I would just smile and nod. I didn't want to embarrass him. I remember in the 2012 election, being back at our family home, and my father walking into the living room and saying, "Man, this is going to be a tough election. You've got a Mormon and you've got a guy who supports gay marriage. Who the hell am I supposed to vote for?" And I looked up at him, and I said, "That must be really hard for you." And then my junior year of college, I had my first boyfriend ever, and we had been dating for like 6 or 7 months, and I was bringing him home for Christmas, winter break, and he was going to be with us for about 4 days. In those 4 days that he was with us, my dad didn't speak to or look at him. I actually remember being at the dinner table one night, and my boyfriend at the time was telling a story, and my dad just began to speak over him as if it was silent before. And my father was no longer my favorite person. All of this came to a head in December of 2015. I was living in San Francisco, and I had gone home for a winter break to see my family for Christmas. and I was dating someone new. And apparently didn't learn my lesson from the first time, and he was coming with me. And I told my mom beforehand, I said, okay, I have a boyfriend, he's coming, can you please prepare Dad? And she said, okay, yes, I can do that for you. And I arrived a few days before my boyfriend was going to get there. And I asked my mom when I got there, I was like, oh, okay, so what did Dad say when you told him? And she was like, oh, I forgot. I didn't tell him yet. I was like, he's gonna be here in like 2 days. Can you please tell him? And she said that she would tell him when we were on the way to the airport. I was like, okay, that's not okay. You need to tell him now. And then she finally said, if you want him to know so badly, you tell him. I did not want a repeat of what had happened years earlier, and so I decided I was going to tell him. So that night, my mom was in the shower, my little brother was downstairs in our basement, and my dad was in the living room watching television. So I walked into the living room, and my dad was in the reclining chair, I was in the couch, and I think the evening news was on. And we were both staring at the television, and I finally said, did Mom tell you the person I'm seeing is coming? And he said, no. My heart began to race a little bit. And he said, I'm assuming it's not a girl, though. I said, no, but I think you'll really like him. And he didn't respond. That was it for my dad. He didn't want to engage anymore. But that wasn't it for me. That wasn't enough for me. And so I pushed. And I said, is that really all you're going to say? And he continued to stare at the television, and he said, well, I'm never going to accept someone into the family if that's what you're thinking. And I was stunned, because that wasn't what I was thinking. I just wanted my dad to talk to him. Not even talk to him, I wanted my dad to meet him. And before I could respond, my father said, you know you're going to hell, right? And I didn't know what else to do besides begin to cry. And once I kind of gained my composure from crying, I just started to argue with him. We talked about the Bible a lot. I had memorized so many verses from Leviticus when I was younger to have an argument against these white frat boys that I would go to parties with at the University of Nebraska. I never thought I would have to use those arguments against my own father. I never knew that the most hurtful things that could ever have been said to me would come from my father. And so all I wanted to do was to hurt him back. And so I did that through words in the only way that I knew how, and I got up and I stood in front of him with my fist clenched at my side and tears just streaming down my face. And I said, I'm going to get married someday, and you're not invited. I'm going to have children someday, and they will never know who their grandfather is. And this is the last time you will ever see me. That was bluffing. I didn't mean any of those things. I just wanted to cause a reaction of some sort in my father. I wanted him to say, I'm sorry, or no, please stay, or at least can we talk? And I stood there waiting for that reaction, and I didn't get it. So I left, and I went into the bathroom where my mom was still showering. I opened the door, sobbing, told her what happened. She opened the shower door, like butt-ass naked, and was just like, and I told her I needed to leave. And she said, yes, my keys are on the dresser. Take my keys, take my car, go, I'll call you later. I went downstairs to the basement where my little brother was and where all my clothes were. I packed a bag, told my brother what happened, and I left. A few hours later, I got a call from my brother, and he said that apparently he and my mom had just been drilling into my father for hours, and my father was now sobbing and asking for me to come back. I came back the next day. And I sat at the kitchen table with my father, and I was so angry and sad and frustrated that I was there. And the first thing my father said to me was, "This is hard for me too, you know." And I had actually really never thought about that before. I didn't think about the fact that I was the first gay person that he knowingly met, that he was raised with very different values than I was, even though he was the one that raised me, and that I didn't create some sort of dialogue with him beforehand to try to work through this. And then he said, "I'm going to try. I'm going to try to open my mind. Is that enough for you?" And I said, "That is all I have ever wanted." This last December, I went back to Nebraska for Christmas again, and I had recently been diagnosed with celiac disease. And I told my parents about it, and they were, like, again, confused, something new that they didn't understand. And I went to bed one night, and I woke up the next morning, and there were hundreds of dollars worth of groceries on the kitchen floor. And I asked my mom, I said, "What is all of this?" And she said, "Oh, your dad went to the grocery store and he bought as many gluten-free snacks as he could find." And I know that this literally has nothing to do with being gay or accepting someone into the family. But for the first time in a really, really long time, I saw my favorite person from my childhood trying really hard to come back. Thank you so much. So we have a fantastic